Yes, the time is 2:30, so welcome to this digital event with BioPorto, following the release of the annual report earlier today. My name is Henrik Ekman, and I'm equity analyst here at HC Andersen Capital. And I will try and do my best to take you through this session. If you ask questions, you can do it as always, and I will try and forward them to Neil or Tony. So with that, a warm welcome to CEO Tony Perret and CFO Neil Goldman. I know there's a lot of things going on, and there has been a lot of activity in your company, both last year and after New Year. So please take us through the highlights.
Okay, thank you for the introduction, Henrik, and for hosting the call today. A warm welcome to everyone for this 2021 annual report call. As a short introduction, my name is Tony Perret. I have been the CEO of BioPorto since November 2021. With me today is Neil Goldman, our Executive Vice President and CFO, who also joined BioPorto last November. Together, we formed the new executive management team. Neil and I are thrilled to be here to talk about 2021, even though our roles during that financial year were somewhat limited. Before we begin, let me remind you that the company's remarks made during this conference call today, April 6, 2022, may include predictions, estimates, and other information that might be considered forward-looking. I encourage you to review the company's annual report and other announcements filed with NASDAQ. In today's presentation, I would like to talk about the impact of acute kidney injury, or AKI, has on both patients and health systems, why that creates a significant market opportunity for BioPorto and the NGAL test, and review highlights from 2021. Then Neil would discuss the main financial highlights of the annual report and talk about our 2022 financial outlook. Finally, I will pull this together with a review of our go-forward strategy and then open up the call for questions, which will be moderated by HC Andersen. We are all here, the entire BioPorto team and all of you, our shareholders, because acute kidney injury is the third leading cause of death annually. When hospitalized, 20% of adults and 25% of children are affected by AKI. It is a relatively unheard of, however, outside the clinical community, because AKI usually starts with another disease state, including cardiac surgery, sepsis, COVID, and many other disease states that include the administration of common medications that can be toxic to the kidneys. The frequency of AKI results in significant clinical and economic burdens. As you can see, hospital stays are longer, more patients need dialysis, and tragically, mortality rates are 25% higher. For patients who survive, the impact of AKI continues for years after their time in the hospital. Altogether, AKI costs the U.S. healthcare system between $5 and $24 billion annually. This can be improved, however, if patients at risk for AKI are identified early and therapy is adjusted accordingly. What does this mean for BioPorto? Well, to start, NGAL is a protein biomarker that is expressed in the early stages of acute kidney injury. The earlier it is assessed that a patient may be at risk for AKI, the better the clinician is informed on how to treat a patient. An estimated global NGAL market of $3 billion, with the largest portion of that being in the US at $1.2 billion. That's why our number one strategic focus is to launch an FDA-approved product in the US. I realize that isn't a surprise for anyone familiar with BioPorto's history. However, strategic decisions can be as much about what you won't do as they are about what you will do. That's especially true for a company like BioPorto, which only has about 30 employees. I'll talk about our strategy later in the call, but I wanted to communicate this importance of this focus right up front. For BioPorto, 2021 was a year of tracking towards U.S. breakthrough. We believe those patient, clinical, and economic burdens are some of the factors that led the USDA to grant the NGAL test a breakthrough device designation with a submission that is focused on pediatrics. Breakthrough status gives our application a priority for review after we submit. Unfortunately, the COVID-19 pandemic, including the resurgence of the Omicron variant, restricted BioPorto's ability to execute on the pivotal clinical trial. It meant that, once again, faced delays in our enrollment of patients for the U.S. pediatric clinical studies, which forms part of our submission to the FDA. That said, our interim data analysis in August of 2021 provided results on key characteristics such as sensitivity and specificity that were consistent with our expectations. We continue to push hard to complete the enrollment of the study despite reduced access to patients. With recent trends towards lower COVID rates, we remain on track with our previously announced plan to complete patient enrollment in the first half of 2022. As mentioned in my introduction, BioPorto also got a new management team after Peter Erickson resigned and later was elected to the board of directors. Both Neil and I have been extremely busy since we started in November, getting familiar with the company, its technology, and stakeholders, and we are absolutely thrilled to contribute to the success of BioPorto. My personal growing understanding of the potential clinical impact has only increased my determination to bring our life-saving test to the market. After significant education on acute kidney injury and its prevalence, and through many meetings with nephrology and critical care key opinion leaders from leading U.S. hospitals, it is clear that healthcare providers face a very serious, underdiagnosed, and highly lethal disease. The candid and strong desire by clinicians that BioPorto get the NGAL test onto the U.S. market has been overwhelming to experience, because we can save lives by identifying patients at risk of AKI and adjusting their care accordingly. Based on clinician feedback, my belief in the need for BioPorto to succeed has grown even stronger. In addition to meeting key stakeholders, I have also worked with the leadership team to create 3 pillars of BioPorto's strategy to deliver the NGAL biomarker as the new standard of care in assessment of kidney health, prepare the company to commercialize and scale, and build a strong team dedicated to the mission. We are a small company with a unique technology and very high ambitions. This calls for clear prioritization and focus on what we aim to achieve in the next 12 to 18 months, which is to obtain US FDA approval of our flagship product, the NGAL test, for use in pediatrics, and drive its adoption in the US, which is the largest market for in vitro diagnostics in the world. An important step of our strategy was completed in March 2022, when, despite times of great difficulty and volatility, we closed a fully subscribed preemptive rights offering for new shares as part of our long-term capital plan that includes a potential US listing. I am very thankful for the support and clear mandate from both existing shareholders and new investors to focus our efforts and execute this strategy. It is a strategy that I firmly believe will bring BioPorto to a very successful and bright future. Next slide, please. I'll now turn the call over to Neil for information on the 2021 financials.
Thanks, Tony. And please let me just start by saying that I'm every bit as excited as you are to be with BioPorto. During my short time with the company, I've had the pleasure of speaking with a number of shareholders and investors, and I look forward to strengthening these relationships going forward. Moving on to the 2021 results. Next slide, please. For the year ended December 31, 2021, revenue was 24.3 million kroner, representing growth of 5% compared to the prior year period. That figure, which was within the updated guidance framework provided in the Q3 2021 report. The increase in revenue was driven by an increase in antibody sales, which are related to the timing of the R&D activities of our customers. This increase was somewhat offset by a reduction in overall NGAL revenues. However, on a regional basis, we experienced a 13% increase in sales of the NGAL test for research use only purposes in the US, which we interpreted as a positive signal that is indicative of growing clinician interest. As Tony will further describe, rest of world NGAL sales are an investment focus for us in 2022. Turning to operating results, for the year ended December 31, 2021, EBIT loss was 65 million kroner, or 3% larger than the prior year period. That figure was within the updated guidance framework provided in the Q3 2020 report. The EBIT loss for the year was lower than originally expected due to changes in management and other employees and the resulting reversal of expenses for their forfeited warrants, offset to some degree by recruiting costs. As of December 31, 2021, our cash position was 45.5 million kroner. During the 12 months ended December 31, 2021, our operations, including net investments, included net cash of 65 million kroner. As announced last week, we just closed a 100.4 million kroner fully subscribed preemptive rights issue to strengthen BioPorto's long-term financial position. Nearly 70 million new shares were offered at a subscription price of 1.50 kroner plus 4 subscription rights. As Tony said earlier, we are very appreciative of the mandate provided to us from our shareholders and investors to execute on our focused strategy. These funds will enable our team to focus on BioPorto's strategy to deliver the NGAL biomarker as the new standard of care in assessment of kidney health, prepare the company to commercialize and scale, and build a strong team dedicated to our mission. This offering is part of our long-term capital plan that includes a potential U.S. listing. Since the U.S. is the largest market for in vitro devices, including the NGAL test, we plan to build a dynamic presence there to support our future customers. Therefore, U.S. institutional investors represent a natural source for the future capital that will eventually be needed to fund BioPorto's onward growth and expansion. This chart illustrates a potential approach, and I want to emphasize potential for how future financing might align with our plans for the pediatric submission of the NGAL test and its subsequent expansion to additional populations and indications. That can include a targeted cross-border offering, a listing on US NASDAQ, or other steps. To be clear, we have not yet identified the future capital structure or key elements related to this type of process. In addition, the chart's timeline is intended to be illustrative for all of the activities on the chart. In the middle of the chart, you see our plans for the pediatric NGAL submission to the FDA, including completing our clinical trial collection by the end of the second quarter of 2022, followed by compiling the results in other technical files, then submitting it to the FDA for its review. The FDA targets up to 150 calendar days after submission of a de novo application to respond. That timeline excludes any time that may be needed for BioPorto to respond to FDA inquiries, which stops the clock on that schedule. Finally, once we submit the de novo application, our clinical and R&D teams will direct their focus to expanding the NGAL test to the adult population, expanded claims, other lab instruments, etc. Now I'll provide an overview of our 2022 financial outlook and then turn the call back to Tony to talk about our strategy. For 2022, BioPorto expects revenue of approximately 24 to 26 million kroner, EBIT loss of 95 to 100 million kroner, and adjusted EBITDA loss of approximately 76 to 81 million kroner. I would like to highlight that with our announcement this morning, we are adding a new guidance figure, adjusted earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, or adjusted EBITDA. This figure also excludes the non-cash impact of share-based compensation. Therefore, it is intended to be a closer measure to cash flow than EBIT. I refer you to our annual report for other disclosures related to this non-IFRS measure. Here are key assumptions in these outlook figures. As I mentioned earlier, EBIT from 2021 was favorably impacted on a non-cash basis by approximately 4 million kroner from the forfeiture of warrants and related reversal of equity compensation expenses for members of management and other team members that resigned. And naturally, we don't expect that to repeat in 2022. The combined impact of this accounting treatment is approximately 15 million kroner of non-cash EBIT loss compared to 2021. Costs related to clinical studies are assumed to be comparable to fiscal 2021. EBIT is assumed to be negatively impacted by the full year effect of 2021 hires of management and other team members. Similarly, costs related to sales and marketing are assumed to increase compared to 2021, associated with the preparation for commercializing the NGAL test in the US and increasing costs to expand support for distribution in the rest of the world. Costs related to R&D are assumed to increase compared to 2021, including as a result of the full year impact of 21 hirings, investments in quality systems, and other costs related to preparing and submitting the de novo application of the NGAL test in the US to the FDA. BioPorto's performance and guidance for 2022 is dependent on the global development of the pandemic. The guidance above is predicated on an assumption of the continued opening of societies and the normalization of access to hospitals, research laboratories, and regulatory bodies. I'll now turn the call back to Tony.
Thank you, Neil. Turning back to our strategy, this is the slide that I shared at the beginning of the call. Neil's and my focus over the last almost 5 months now have been to review and refine our strategy and communicate it internally and externally on a consistent basis. Our strategy is straightforward. As you know, the best strategies are simple strategies. And especially for a company our size, strategic decisions can be as much about what you won't do as they are about what you will do. As we look at this year and into next year, BioPorto will be highly focused on preparing for the launch of the NGAL test in the US, initially for pediatrics and subsequently for adults. Along the way, we will work to sustain our other revenue streams and continue to develop a pipeline of potential new products. But let me be clear, those activities will never take a priority over our focus on a US launch of an FDA-cleared product. Let me focus on the 3 pillars of our strategy. The first pillar is to drive NGAL test market adoption and have a pipeline of high medical value products. First and foremost is our objective to complete our trials and submit an application to the FDA. In the meantime, we can generate NGAL awareness by promoting its use in the rest of the world through our distributor partners. We'll focus on providing them the education and tools to do this effectively while recruiting key opinion leaders to promote on our behalf. As we get closer to launch in the US, including getting a sense of likelihood and timing of approval, we will invest in the US commercial team and pre-market to target accounts. Our second pillar is strengthen the company to scale and execute. This means investing in our quality and documentation systems so that they are FDA audit ready. It also means focusing on our core business, operations, and financing the company, which is well underway. Our third and very important pillar is to attract, develop, retain the best and brightest employees aligned with our values. As we build a team, we need to recruit from the very best to help drive success. The pandemic has driven employee turnover in many businesses globally. Employees are much more selective than ever on where they will be employed. Our goal is for BioPorto to be a company where employees are motivated to join and stay. I would like to conclude by saying the demand for our potentially life-saving products is high, and our focus remains on the timely execution of all the tasks to get our NGAL assay on the market and accelerate market adoption. The future of the company is in the hands of a very talented team. I would like to say a big thank you to our employees, customers, and shareholders as we continue on this journey to have a significant impact on providing better care for some of the most vulnerable patients. This concludes our presentation. Back to you, Henrik, as we are happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much, Tony, and thank you very much, Neil. Yes, there are already questions, and these are there are some questions relating to this the issue of the continuous communication back and forth with FDA. Can you try and elaborate a little bit of because this has been communicated many times both by you and the previous management that there are talks with FDA in various regards. So just to get a better sense of what are they asking about? Why this ongoing debate back and forth?
Well, let me clarify. It's not a debate. It's just clarification of the requirements that they would like to see for our submission. And it's really all about getting it right the first time. So far, we've had 3 pre-submission meetings with the FDA focused on which patients that we will test, that we will submit initially. As I indicated before, the first indication will be for pediatrics, which are children between the ages of 3 months and 22 years old. So there is a small part of that population that is adult. This is the area that the FDA asked us to focus on, and the area that they provided us the breakthrough designation for. So this will get a priority review by the FDA. Also discussed is exactly what data elements they are looking to see, what data is required to generate a reference range, meaning what is the range of NGAL for healthy donors, and then what are the data elements for us to establish a cutoff by which, if you have a certain level of NGAL, then you should be suspicious that there is a risk of AKI with that particular patient. So it's really more clarification, and we will continue to have those conversations with the FDA as we can get closer to the submission process.
So based on your experience communicating with, being in dialogue with FDA, this is sort of normal procedure, and you still expect that everything is in place for you to ultimately get the approval of the NGAL test?
Yeah, I would characterize it as even more than normal. The more communication you have, the better, right? Because then the FDA knows exactly what's coming their way and they are prepared for it.
Yeah. Then there's a clarifying question regarding the COVID test. What's the latest update on that?
Yeah, so there has been some news articles that have been released recently. There was one by MedWatch that was based on an interview that they had with us, and then there was a subsequent article that was based on that article. And the second article indicated that the COVID investigation was dropped, and I want to clarify that that is not the case. We are continuing to investigate a COVID assay. But to be very clear, this is an investigation, and once we feel that we have a product that we can, bring to market, then we will have to move it into the development process, I should say.
Good. Sorry, I'm just referring. I would just like to go back to this, if you don't mind. This very interesting slide, which as we move along and you hopefully and expectedly get the approval for the pediatric tests, then that should sort of lead the way to the further indications into adults and into these other areas of clinical settings. Can you try and describe and elaborate as to how easy should we expect the transition going if you get the approval for the pediatrics indication? How fast afterwards, and how much time and money will you have to spend to get the adult approval or submission and afterwards approval, and how easy it is for you from a sort of a commercializing perspective? Is it to move into the emergency departments and what you're calling certain outpatient settings? It's just to get an idea of how we go for that relatively small market of pediatrics in US to this global market of $3 billion.
Yeah, so it's always harder to get that first approval, right? And that first approval is called a de novo approval, which basically means is not another device like it or another diagnostic like it on the market. Once you get that first approval, subsequent approvals are easier. It goes into what they call a 510K clearance, which is basically saying, hey, there's a device like this on the market, and we're proving that we are as good as that predicate device, and we want to expand our claims to include adults, to include other settings outside of the ICU. However, there will be some additional data that has to be generated. we will work on generating that data after we do the submission. We won't wait for the FDA approval to start the trials that are required, any of the validation that's required for that subsequent submission.
Okay. So from a go-to-market strategy point of view, to move on from the ICUs when you get the approval for pediatrics there to the emergency departments and these certain outpatient settings, that should also be a relatively easy process. Or what should we expect in terms of duration of this process?
Yeah, so it's easier, right? What you have to do is validate that this test works just as well in the emergency department with emergency room patients as it does with ICU patients. So it's easier. You don't have to gather as much data. You don't necessarily have to establish reference ranges, or you may have to establish reference ranges. To be clear, we haven't discussed the subsequent indications with the FDA yet, so we don't know exactly what those data parameters are that they're looking for.
But as you try to ultimately in the future try to address these potential markets of 3 billion and at first hand in US by 1.2 billion, those 700 extra million besides the ICU, how are they divided in emergency departments and certain outpatient settings? And what is actually certain outpatient settings? Can you describe what that would typically constitute?
Yeah, so an outpatient setting may be a nephrologist's office, right, where they're treating a patient that's on dialysis that doesn't necessarily have chronic kidney disease, but they have been discharged from the hospital and they need to monitor their kidney health. By and far, the emergency department, they have a lot of patients, right? And it depends on how you select the patients will determine how big that particular market is. It is a very big market, but the ICU itself is a very big market as well. And so that will be, both those areas will be our next areas of focus.
And you're mentioning in your report today that your strategy or goal is longer term in 2025 is to become a leading provider of NGAL tests within some of these markets. It's just to get how we should, as investors, translate this into penetration rate or market shares in these various markets. What would be the expected level that you would? Are we in the? Because I imagine that to some extent, as things look right now, you will be the first with this type of NGAL test. So are you thinking about or talking about 25% market share, 50% market share, or 75% market? Just to get an idea of what does it mean when you're talking about becoming a leader in these 3 billion markets?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a good question. If we achieve 25% market share in a 3-year time frame, I would be very, very happy with that. Let's leave it there. But this is one of those tests that will take take on a life of its own once you get it out there and once the word starts getting out. So similar to troponin, which is a marker of heart injury, heart health, that didn't require, once it got onto the market, it didn't require a whole lot of sales effort to grow itself. And that's what we're hoping with NGAL as well. But, those first, 2-3 years will be a lot of education for clinicians and basically getting more key opinion leaders on our side talking about our product to start that ball rolling.
Then we have different questions from the chat. There's one regarding the sepsis study at the Rigshospitalet. What's the latest update on that?
Yeah, so one thing I want to clarify is that it's a study of thrombomodulin as a biomarker. So thrombomodulin is a protein that's expressed to higher levels when there's endothelial damage. Endothelial damage can occur as a result of sepsis, a result of COVID, myocardial infarction. There are a number of things that can cause endothelial damage. So it's not necessarily a biomarker of sepsis as much as it is a biomarker of endothelial damage. They have concluded, or close to concluded, come close to conclusion on their tests on COVID patients. So there was actually 2 studies, one on COVID patients and one on sepsis patients. We just need them to publish on that particular study. The one for sepsis patients continues. We don't necessarily have a good update as to when that will conclude, but it continues. And our anecdotal data coming out of those studies are that this is a good biomarker for detecting patients that are at risk of ARDS, acute respiratory distress syndrome. And if you treat those patients quickly with certain drugs in the prostacyclin category, then you can keep these patients off of mechanical ventilators. And as many people know, when you go on a mechanical ventilator, your chances for survival start to decrease. So it's a good tool to be used in the ICU. We need the studies to complete, and we need to develop a go-to-market strategy for that particular test as we move forward. Again, this takes second priority to our NGAL focus for 2022.
Okay, time is running, but I think we can just have a few more questions. There's one relating to your current cash position and the usage of cash, which officially you say it will last approximately 12 months, going to the expected, more or less to the expected approval of the pediatric indication. So what happens afterwards? There's this question: is it will you ask for money again from current investors, or would you partner up to co-market stuff and to bring forward the adult indication, or what should we expect in terms of your financing strategy in the next 12 to 18 months?
Yeah, that's a great question, Henrik, and that's why we presented the slide. And if you want to jump forward to it again to put it on the screen, I won't go through it all over again. But that's why we put this slide up, to show that the future capital structure of the company and what its requirements. It's actually not this one. Keep going. It's the horizontal slides. There you go. Thank you. Is defining what the future capital structure requirements are going to look like and need is something that Tony and I will be very focused on as we move forward. It's obviously a very important aspect of the business, because we need to continue to drive to achieve all the patient benefits and market opportunities that Tony has talked about today. You're correct, Henrik, in terms of how you describe the cash runway. Our latest guidance in the prospectus is that the fully subscribed offering provides funding through 12 months after the prospectus date, which was in early March. So that's what our guidance says, and we obviously can't go beyond talking about that timeline. But that's why you start looking at these things now, and you look at the right ways to structure that, where to structure it, how to do it. There isn't anything that's off the table. But again, with a focus on being able to drive the strategy that Tony just talked about executing.
But there's one question which I guess is off the table, or you can comment on that. Is it, well, if ultimately could it be considered to actually sell, out-license the NGAL test to a partner to focus on other products in your pipeline?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear this. Be focused to
focus on other products in your pipeline. So actually, you're so simply because the NGAL test, I guess that's the motive of the question. The NGAL test for further indication would be so expensive that you should actually consider selling this or out-license this to a partner, and then just focus on the relatively smaller, newer things in your pipeline?
Well, our jobs really simply is to maximize shareholder value. It starts and ends there. Okay. So I would not imagine that that's something we would proactively try to go do. However, as a public company or as any company, people can always knock on your door, and sometimes they knock on your door with news that can be very good. So again, I think our screen would be, is this the right way to maximize shareholder value that we and the board would evaluate? And that's probably about as much as we can say about that, but hopefully that ensures we're completely aligned there.
And one final question, which sort of is a little bit optimistic, I think, probably, is what if the NGAL test will not get approved? Is there a plan B, or what should we expect as investors?
I mean, obviously, we would have to react. The idea is that we are submitting a very complete package that is bulletproof. That being said, we could get surprised here. The goal is not to be surprised, get a complete package in. And if it is rejected, obviously, we'd have to analyze why it was rejected and whether we can react quickly to that rejection and meet the FDA's needs.
Okay. As said, time is running, so thank you so much, Tony Pereira and Neil Goldman from BioPorto. Thank you for being here, presenting your annual report and taking questions. Thank you for now.
Okay. Thank you, Henrik.
And have a great day, everyone.
Yeah. Bye, everyone.